So at the end of last year, I had a workshop built in our backyard. And while I am so thankful to have my own workshop now after, 20 years of dreaming of having my own workshop, let's just say that the outside of the building leaves a lot to be desired. It is a big, drab, gray building just sitting in our backyard. And I have a vision of turning this building into what looks like a cute little cottage. So I have lots of projects planned for it, but the very first thing that I want to do is build shutters for the windows. So let me get started. Obviously, the first thing I had to do was measure my windows. I wanted the height of the shutters to be not quite as tall as the trim, and I wanted the width of the shutters to be in proportion with the width of the window. Since my windows are 32 inches wide, I wanted to make each shutter approximately 16 inches wide. I'm making these shutters out of PVC boards because they hold up to the weather and they will never rot. I started by cutting the vertical boards for the shutters, and I'm using 1x6s. So that means that each of my 16-inch wide shutters will require 3 boards. I want the finished height of my shutters to be 46 inches. So for now, I'm cutting these to 48 inches. Once I had all of my boards cut, I needed to do a little more work before putting these together. PVC boards are very sharp and square on the edges, and so joining them together like that would not look great. So I decided to use my sander with 80 grit sandpaper and just round off those harsh edges of each of the boards. And once I had those rounded with the 80 grit sandpaper, I went back over it very quickly with 120 grit just to give it a smoother finish. Here you can see the difference between a sanded and an unsanded board. You can see that the board on the left has a softer, rounded over edge, and the one on the right has a very sharp and square edge. I think the one on the left looks so much better. And here you can see the sanded versus the unsanded on the same board. That top portion just has a softer look to it, whereas this part could probably cut you if you ran your finger over that too quickly. So I really do think that sanding this makes a big difference in the finished product. And here's what they look like once they're all sanded and they're side by side. I think that rounded over edge just gives it so much more character. With all of the boards sanded, I was ready to put the shutters together. I attached the boards to each other using pocket holes on the backs of the boards. So the first thing that I had to do was mark where I wanted my pocket holes to be drilled. So I measured about 3 inches from the top and the bottom of the shutters. And then in between those marks, I marked off about every 7 inches. There's really no rhyme or reason for that specific number, but 7 inches just kind of felt right. I would say don't space the screws any more than 12 inches apart. Also, I only needed to drill pocket holes on 2 of the 3 boards, since board number 1 would be screwed into board number 2, and board number 2 would be screwed into board number 3. So board number 3 did not need any pocket holes at all. So if you're making shutters with 4 boards, then you would only need to drill holes into 3 of the boards. And then once I got those marked off, I also numbered the boards just to avoid any confusion. I used my Kreg pocket hole jig to drill all of the pocket holes in these boards. I ended up with about 7 holes per board. Now, if you're a DIYer and you don't have a Kreg pocket hole jig, I highly recommend investing in one. You can build so many quality items with these, from furniture to shutters to cabinets and pretty much anything you could imagine. I've had several different versions of this tool over the years, and this one is by far the best one that I've owned. I like it because it automatically adjusts the position of the hole to the thickness of the wood that you're working with. So as you can see, it makes really quick work of drilling pocket holes into wood. With all of the pocket holes drilled, I was finally ready to put the shutter together. I started by lining up all of the boards and making sure that they were even on the ends. This is where having the boards numbered really helps, although it's really not that big of a deal. It's pretty self-explanatory. And then I used clamps to hold the boards together. If you don't have clamps, you really don't need them for this project. In fact, I'm pretty sure that I put together at least half of my shutters without clamps. But on this first one, I did decide to use clamps just to hold those boards together while I screwed them together. Just 1¼ inch Kreg screws to put these boards together. And I made sure that I bought the blue screws, which are labeled for outdoor use. Since these are outdoor shutters that are going on the outside of a building, obviously I wanted them to be as weather resistant as possible. So if you're making an outdoor project, be sure to use the appropriate screws for outdoor use. Started screwing the boards together, you can see how I pushed down on the boards right next to each other, just to make sure that both boards were flush with each other on the front side. If you do that, that's really why you don't need clamps, because you can do that without clamps. And here's what it looked like once all of those boards were screwed together. Since I originally cut my boards a bit longer than I wanted my finished shutter height to be, I went back and cut the assembled shutter to the correct finished height using my miter saw. I had to do a double cut on each end just to get the full width of the shutter. And since I had to do a double cut, and that's not always perfect, I went back over it just very quickly with my sander to get rid of any blade marks where the two cuts met. Final pieces to my shutters were the battens that go horizontally across the top and the bottom of the front. My finished shutters were 16¼ inches wide, so I cut these battens to that width minus about 1/8 of an inch. For this I used 1x4s because I thought that the 1x6s would look a little too big. I only had enough 1x4s for 15 of the 16 battens that I needed for my 8 shutters. So rather than going and buying one whole additional 8-foot PVC board when I only needed 16 inches, I decided to piece together 2 scraps for the final batten. I used heavy-duty PVC glue to glue the scraps together. And let me warn you, this stuff is very thick and very messy. It comes with this little round brush, and this brush soaks up a ton of glue. That's fine if you're working on a plumbing project, but if you're working on a project that actually needs to look nice once it's glued together, you have to get rid of a lot of that excess glue. But I finally managed to get rid of all the excess, and then I glued up the ends of these boards. Once the glue was dry, I cut the board to the length that I needed. It's not perfect, but I think it'll be just fine for an outdoor project. I decided to place my battens about 6 inches from the top and the bottom of the shutter. So I measured and marked off 6 inches. And then I used those marks as the guides to place my battens on the shutter. I used two 16 gauge nails into each batten just to hold it on temporarily at this point. And then I flipped the shutter over and used screws through the back of the shutter into the battens in order to hold them securely in place. Before I placed my screws, I measured that 6-inch mark again, just so I would have a guideline to know where to place the screws. And with the battens securely in place, I just used a little bit of caulk in order to cover over those nail holes. And I was finally ready to paint my shutters. I used my Wagner spray painter in order to paint these, and because I was using a dark color on PVC boards, I went to Sherwin-Williams and had them color match the color that I wanted in vinyl safe paint. The manufacturer of these vinyl boards recommends that you use vinyl safe paint if you're going to use a dark color. And you can see I didn't even bother to paint the back because these are just going to be stationary shutters. They're not going to open and close, so there's no need to waste paint on the back. And once the paint was dry, I was finally ready to hang my shutters. For each of the shutters, I actually used 2 pairs of hinges. I used these little hinges attached to the back of the shutters in order to actually hang the shutters. So these actually served a purpose, whereas the ones that I put on the front later are just for decorative purposes. I attached these smaller hinges so that the ends of them were centered with the ends of the battens that are on the front of the shutters. As I attached these little hinges, I realized that 2 of the screws that I had used to attach the battens were actually right in the way. So I had to remove those first and then attach the hinges and then put those screws back in. It was no big deal. It just took a couple of seconds. These smaller hinges are the ones that actually attach the shutters to the trim around the windows. With those hinges attached, the shutter was in place, but it wasn't completely secured. In order to secure the shutter to the building, I needed to place another screw through the batten and into the siding. But in order to determine where that screw needed to go, I needed to know where my decorative hinges were going to go because those were going to hide those screws holding the shutters to the building. To secure the shutter to the building, I use these 3.5-inch exterior screws, and I just screw them right through the shutter, through the batten, and into the siding. And once the shutter was completely secured to the building, I was ready to put my decorative hinges on the battens, and those would cover over those screws. So added these ring pulls as a little decorative touch. And finally, I wanted to add some shutter dogs, but because these are decorative, non-functional shutters, I didn't want to actually put screws through the siding. So I just used some adhesive to glue the shutter dogs onto the shutter. And then I used my miter saw to cut the screws down short so that they didn't actually have to go through the siding. And I just used a little bit of glue to glue those screws in place so that the shutter dogs look functional, but they're not. They're just decorative. And here's a look at the finished shutters. I put shutters on the back windows also because the back side of my workshop is visible from the street and our driveway. Here's a quick look at the building without the shutters. And here's what it looks like now with its new shutters. And this is just the first of many projects that I have planned for my workshop as I try to turn this formerly drab building into something that looks like a cute little cottage in our backyard. So be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see the rest of this transformation.